Hello BTP users! Did you ever wonder which BTP services consume most of your CPEA credits on a monthly basis? Or are you looking for a tool to do cost allocation based on line of business, project or cost center? Then the BTP Resource Consumption Monitor, or BTP FinOps application in short, will be the right tool for you. In this video, we'll take you through the requirements and the steps to deploy this application in your own account. Good luck!
In this video, I will take you through the different steps required to deploy and install the BTP FinOps application. The application provides you insight into your CPEA credit expenditure by looking at your account, the usage and the spend, and looking at the different services that are active in your global account. It maps out the different services together with their spend in the different areas of your account, the directories and sub-account setups that you have, or the multiple global accounts that you have active in your organization. It also maps your consumption against your CPEA or BTPEA contract to have an understanding of what your projected forecast around that is, and gives you the ability to do cross-charging, to actually distribute the different costs that are generated on the BTP platform to different projects, different departments, different teams within your organization, and make them responsible for each of their own costs that they consume. Last but not least, the application also allows you to define alerts, so you get notified for different situations. For example, if a specific service is consuming more credits than we anticipated to use based on its historic usage. So in order to install this application in your own BTP account, we can head over to GitHub, where we find all the relevant information. On the GitHub, we can see the different requirements and steps to deploy the application. So let's go through it one by one so you can understand how to set up the application in your own account. On the right-hand side, you see a brand new sub-account I just created. It doesn't have any applications yet. It just has a handful of baseline services that I will show to you just now. But for the moment, I have a single space, which is empty and nothing is deployed in. So looking at the README documentation on the left-hand side, we have the section of requirements. So first of all, it says we need a sub-account and a space. So I have my sub-account called FinOps, in which I have a space called Dev. So that is ready for me. Then the application requires a few subscriptions. The application will make use of a HANA database. It will use WorkZone as the front-end layer, and we will use the Business Application Studio as the IDE to pull the code line from Git and deploy it in the sub-account. So these are services that you might already have in different sub-accounts. I create them here in this new sub-account, so they're available for us to use. So I have the Business Application Studio, I have HANA Cloud, and I have built WorkZone Standard Edition. The Business Application Studio, this can reside in any sub-account that you have access to. That is a development tool, so it doesn't have to sit in the same sub-account as where you're going to deploy the application to. HANA Cloud as well, it can sit in a different sub-account as the sub-account where you deploy the application to. However, it has to sit in the same region. So if your region is EU10 or EU20 or US10, then your HANA Cloud has to reside in the same region. Build WorkZone, that has to sit in the exact same sub-account as where the application will be deployed. So this is a service that has to sit in the same sub-account. We can't use it from a different sub-account. So with these subscriptions available to me, I can move to the next section, which is section of entitlements. So the application will deploy different service instances and applications in your sub-account. So in order to do the deployment correctly, it will spin up a few services, and they're listed out here. So the first thing we have to make sure is that my account has the correct entitlements set, so these services can be spun up. Let me go into entitlements and click on edit to add maybe missing service plans. So first of all, we see alert notification. So I'm going to add that to my account in the standard plan. Then I see authorization and trust management. That's a default service that's already available. Destination service is also default. HTML5 is also default. We need the job scheduling service. So let me add this to the account as well. Then we see HANA, schemas, and AGI containers. So also there, I'm going to choose the AGI shared service plan. And we also need a usage and data management service. This is actually the data source that is going to provide us with all the information that your account is using. We are going to do that for the entire GA, the entire global account that the sub-account resides in. And application logging service is the last service. There we are going to use standard plan. So with these selected plans added to our account, you can click on add and save. Then we can look at the optional services. So optionally, the application also delivers SAC content. That is something that I have available, so also that requirement is here fulfilled. Then let's take a look at the download and installation. So there will be 3 components that we're going to install. There will be a backend application, which is a Cloud Foundry GAP application. There is the optional SAC content, and then there is the front end, which we're going to deploy in a workzone. 1, 2, and 3. So let's start with number 1, the Cloud Foundry application. In order to deploy the Cloud Foundry application, we're going to use the Business Application Studio. So I'm going to head back over to my instances and subscriptions and access the Business Application Studio. In here, I will have to create a development space of kind full stack cloud application with the additional feature of development tools for workzone. So let me do that. Let me call it monitoring. It's going to be a full stack cloud application, and I'm going to choose the additional feature set of development tools for workzone. Let me create this. Once this is up and running, we can open the development space. What we're going to do then is we're going to clone this repository into the development space. So we can clone it from Git, and we take the URL of this repository. Let's open the project. Okay, that's great. We can close the start page and we can open a terminal window. So now, looking at the documentation, we have 2 options of deployment. Deploying with alert notification configuration or deploying without alert notification configuration. So because this is an initial deployment, we're going to choose to deploy with alert notification configuration. If we want to do that, we first going to provide our email address to be the receiver of alerts that the application will send out. And we can make that change in the empty.ax file. So in the CF folder, we're going to open the file and we're going to put our email address here. That's great. It auto saves, so we can just close the file. Then we're going to follow the steps here. So from the project root folder that we're in now, we're going to navigate into the CF folder, do an installation of the dependencies, running a build, and then deploying to Cloud Foundry. So I'm going to the CF folder. I'm going to run the npm install. And then I can do an mbt build. With the build completed, we are now ready to deploy the application. Now, before we can do that, we have to authenticate with Cloud Foundry. So we can do that in the left menu of Cloud Foundry, where we can log in to our account. I'm going to use SSO to log in. I'm going to choose my FinOps demo organization and the dev space that we had from before. With this set, we can see again that nothing is yet deployed in the space, but we're going to do that now. We're going to execute this cf deploy command. This is now going to deploy the entire application from a backend point of view. So this will create the AGI container, it will publish the applications in the HTML5 content repository, and it will create the service layer, the GAP application. This will take, let's say, 1 or 2 minutes to complete. So let's wait for that. With the deployment completed, we can quickly refresh the list and indeed see that a handful of services and applications are now available in the account. We can see the same inside the account itself. Different service instances are available. There is also a destination created to our application. And when we navigate into the space, then we will find the actual application there as well, up and running. So that's great. That completes step number 1 of the deployment of the Cloud Foundry application. You might also have received an email with a request to whitelist your email address for further on alert notifications. So just action that email. There is a link in the email. If you click the link, then you just have to give confirmation that you want to receive further alerts that the application sends out. Then we're ready for step number 2, SAC content. The SAC content is an optional step, so you can choose to do it or leave it for later. However, it does give additional insights in your usage and could be an optional interface that business users use to look at the cost allocated to their project or their department. So I strongly suggest to do it, but it's something you can do later on as well. Let's now do it together. So we start by defining a connection in SAC. So I'm going to head over to my SAC tenant and define a new connection. This connection will be to the freshly created AGI container that the deployment process just created for me. Going to head over to the connections, create a new connection to live data to SAP HANA. And the name has to be BTP RC HDI because that name is defined in the content package. Connection type is going to be SAP HANA Cloud. And then the details, the host, username, password, we can find in our BTP cockpit. Let's head over to instances. Let's look at the database AGI container. And then there's a key. Let's open the key and look at the information here. So we're going to copy the host. Going to copy the user. And we're going to copy the password. With that, we can just click on OK. It will do a quick validation of the connection. And we see here that there's no connection possible. Maybe that's because I didn't whitelist the additional IP addresses beyond the region of my BTP account. Let me quickly correct that in the HANA system. For that, I'm going to navigate to my sub-account, open the HANA tools, and for my HANA that I'm using, manage the configuration in which I'm able to switch the connection to allow all IP addresses. You can also use a specific range, but for now I will allow all. Okay, so now we can close this, go back to SAC, close the error, and try again. That's great, now it works. So now we have our BTPRC HDI connection, and we can now continue with the uploading of content. So step number 2 in the documentation. So in the SAC tenant, I'm going to import the content package. The content package itself, I can download from the Git repository. So in the Git, I can navigate to the SAC folder, in which I have a package that I can download. Just click on the file and download the raw file. Back into SAC, I'm going to upload this file. We can always monitor how the upload is doing. Once it is completed, we can just refresh our list. And we find the package here on top that says BTPRC FinOps dashboard. We're going to click on it to open it. And we're going to validate the different settings, the import options. The defaults all should be fine, and we click on import. Also here, we can monitor the progress in the alert section. Once that is completed, then we can look at step number 3 in the documentation, allowing app integration. So part of the SAC story pages are embedded in the application. To allow for that embedding, we have to whitelist our Launchpad URL in the SAC tenant. To do so, we need to get our Launchpad URL. We can find it in the BTP cockpit. Let's navigate to the BTP cockpit, open the Workzone Standard Edition, and then in the URL, we're going to see an address that has launchpad.region.onDemand.com. We can copy this and then in SAC, we're going to navigate to System Administration App Integration. And we're going to add a new trusted origin, HTTPS, and then wildcard.launchpad, and then the continuation of your area. We save this, and that's great. Step number 4, validation of imported artifacts. So the content package that was just uploaded is configured to point to your BTPRC AGI connection, but also might rely on the schema names as how it is used in our development system. To quickly validate that they match, we can navigate to the modeler and open the different models to make sure that the connection is valid. You can navigate into the newly created folder. You will see 1 story and 3 models. So let's open the model one by one. If it opens, it is great. If it doesn't, it will allow you to change the source. So here we're going to change the data source to point to our BTPRC HDI. That doesn't change. But then in data source, we choose the one that is proposed. The reason for this is that the schema name in the AGI is slightly different. That's fine. We can save this and go back. We do the same thing for the second model. We try to open it. If it doesn't, we're going to change the data source. We save it. We go back and do the same for the last one. And we save it. That's great. So now the models are correctly connected to your AGI container. Last but not least, we now need to validate the story itself. So it already contains data. So the deployment of the application also triggered a job to load initial data. So if that worked well, then you will already see data. If there's nothing shown yet, don't worry, we can always check that later. What I'm going to do now is to get the URL of this story that we can use in the application to embed it there. So in the file share, there is a specific link that is mentioned. Let's copy that entire link. And let's head back to the Business Application Studio. I'm quickly going to create a new file as my notepad to paste the URL in there. Then we can head over to documentation again and look at the next section, which is the work zone content. So the work zone content will contain the front end that we will use to consume the application. Now, before we can deploy anything, we have to change some of the coding files to map to our environment. We have to make two changes. The first change is to specify the correct subaccount ID in the applications. And the second change is to use this SAC URL so the different widgets can point to the correct story. So the first change we're going to do is we're going to change your subaccount GUID to the correct subaccount GUID that we're using. So there are 8 different applications in which we have to change the value. This subaccount GUID we can find in the cockpit. So we're going into the subaccount overview and we can copy the subaccount ID. So we can now replace it all, just maybe not in the README file. Doesn't make sense. So we can do 8 replacements to update the files. That's great. That's the first change. The second change, that is the SAC URL. So the target URL will look like this. Let me copy this and also put it now in my notepad as our target URL. So first of all, it says it has to be yourhost.7analytics.cloud. So we are using this system. So I'm just going to copy that host name and put it in the target URL. Then in the tenant, we need our tenant ID, which is this guy here, D4F8 in my system. And then we need the story. And the story ID is this long thing in the end. Going to copy this and paste it there. Okay, so now we have a target URL. We can quickly validate if this URL is valid by loading it like this in the browser, just to validate that it is working. Even though it gives an error, it's fine that it can load like this for the moment. So we can use this URL going forward. I'm going to copy this and I'll also use the replacement function to replace your SAC story URL with that URL. That should give you 4 hits, of course, without the README file. So 4 little applications in which the URL will get updated. Let's do that. And that's great. So we can close our files and look at the next step. So once we updated the files, we can do the build of the content. So in the terminal, I'm going to navigate one level up and go inside the workzone folder. In workzone, I'm going to do the npm install, and afterwards I'm going to run the build command, npm run build. Once this is completed, we can look in the folder structure. In the main, let me close this, in the main workzone folder, there is now a new file, package.zip. We can download the package.zip to your local laptop. And then we head over to step number 2, deploying this package, deploying the zip file in workzone. Go back to the cockpit, go into your subscriptions, and open build workzone. Here we can navigate to the channel manager, and we have to do two things. The first thing is we're going to refresh the HTML5 content repository that is already there. So on this item here, HTML5 apps, I'm just going to click refresh. This is going to update the internal repository of workzone with the new applications that we deployed initially when we did the CF deploy. Once that is finished, we can add the new package of our application. We can click on content package and upload the zip file. Runtime destination is the destination that the CF deploy created for us, pointing to our application. The rest we can keep as is. This creation of the content package takes a few seconds, but it's going to create the different spaces and pages and tiles and widgets in the workzone content that we can later consume via one of the sites. Now we can head over to the site directory and create a site that will show the content. Let's create a new site. Let's call it monitoring. We don't have to do many changes in this, but we have to make sure that if we go into edit mode, the display we have to change to spaces and pages new experience, the last option. Also, on the right-hand side, we're going to assign the role that we just uploaded in the package, which is both the base role for all the applications, and also because we activated the SAC content, we can activate the SAC role as well. This would be optional. If you decide not to use SAC, then you also do not need the role here. You can save this. And optionally, we can navigate back to the list of sites, click on the three dots, and then configure a site alias to make it easier in terms of having a URL to access the website. That's great. We configured the site. Now all what is left is role assignments, assigning roles to the end users of the application. So there will be two types of roles we're going to assign, backend roles and front-end roles. So when you head over to the BTP cockpit and you go into the user section on your sub account, you can open your user and click on the three dots to assign role collections. The first two that starts with the curly line, these are front-end roles. So the access role is the base role for workzone. The SAC role is the SAC content that is again optional. So we have two front-end roles. Backend-wise, there is a role called BTP Resource Consumption Viewer. That is a role that we need to gain access to the Cloud Foundry application that will give us the different data points. We assign the role collection. to any of the users that need access to the application. And that's it. We're done with the deployment. So now we can head over back to WorkZone and launch the site that we just created. While this is loading, let me maximize our screen. And we see the applications loading. The Overview tab gives us high-level information about the data that the tool collected, the highest credit forecasts of the different services that we expect to consume most of our credits, a little breakdown of in which sub-accounts and directories most of the costs originate, and a history that will be built up the longer this tool runs. We see in the different tabs on top, we can quickly validate. Billing verification is a very service-centric view, allowing you to view the different consumption for each of the different services in your account. For example, we have WorkZone, we have Runtime, we have HANA Cloud, and they all generate a specific cost and are forecasted to also use a specific amount of credits towards the end of the month. Each of them have further details that you can explore, and in the documentation, it's also a bit explained on what you can do here. Especially have a look at the forecasting configuration, because this will be important for you to tweak and tailor depending on the service to make sure that the forecasted cost is realistic in terms of which service it is and how we anticipate its consumption. The cost breakdown takes a look at the account structure point of view. It follows the account structure as you have it in your BTP cockpit in terms of directories, sub-accounts, and different services that are active, each with their charge and the deltas of how the cost actually changed from yesterday or from the previous month. You can look at this on a daily basis, for example, today, the 4th of July, or you can look at it on a monthly basis if you just want to keep track throughout the year on how a cost evolved month by month. Okay, so here, for example, we see for the month of June and May that the information has been loaded, that we see the different costs. In terms of credit expenditure, this is now where we map it to your CPEA contract, and we look at your available credits or your contract value, and then the available credits that will, of course, diminish and burn down over time. Cross-charging allows you to set tags for cross-charging purposes where you can allocate costs to different projects, different departments. By default, there are two labels defined, two tags defined, which is cost center and line of business, but these can be configured in the configuration before you deploy the application. You can just navigate to a specific sub-account you want to tag and then edit the tags to say, for example, sub-account IT is being used by line of business IT for 100%, or maybe 80% IT, and then a second line of business, for example, operations, will use 20%. When we save that, we see the cost allocation here. So whatever costs that the sub-account IT generates for each and all of the services in there combined, IT will receive 80%, operations will receive 20% of that cost. The end result of that allocation can be seen in the different pages here. For example, the monthly allocation of the different charges. So if I want to look at the line of business and the IT line of business, I see 80% of the IT cost is going into the IT department, which is $156 for May and $167 for the month of June, and so on. It's also possible to quickly test the alerting and monitoring. So in here, we can define different alerts and make sure that we define thresholds on when we want to be notified via email. By default, there will be 2 alerts created for you: sample alert and out of credit charges. So if you have a look at sample alert, we go into edit mode. Here you can, for example, choose which directories or accounts you want to be alerted on, and then also the thresholds, what the conditions would be for you to receive an alert. For example, when the forecast cost, which means the cost that a specific service will consume towards the end of the month, is, for example, above $1,000 or whatever your currency is, and the forecast percentage, which is a measure of the current consumption compared to previous consumption of the past months, is, for example, above 120% of past consumption. You can choose any kind of metric here. You can go for delta calculations, which is a daily or monthly delta, or you can look at the measures, which is the actual cost today, on, for example, on the 4th of July, or you can look at the forecasts of what this service or this sub-account will generate towards the end of the month, and the month is closed. The items that have the little PCT at the end denote percentages, and that is then, of course, compared to the base of the previous day or wherever the percentage is based on. Everything you configure here quickly gets analyzed against your available information, and there's a little simulation result of, with these conditions, what content would be in the email. This is now an empty table. So if I quickly change these amounts to maybe catch some of my services that are in my account at the moment, then I can see that I have 2 services that adhere to these thresholds, because the cost that we forecast is more than $100 and the percentage is 400, which is more than 20%. So this you can always save and then activate in your account. If we also quickly want to validate the SAC connectivity, then, for example, in the cross-charging, there are 2 SAC dashboards, the daily view and the monthly view. So if I open the daily view, then we will be able to look at an embedded SAC dashboard deep linked into the URL that we configured in the Business Application Studio. And this will load for our day. Again, here we can now see sub-account IT, line of business IT receives $118, and operations was a remaining 20%, so only $29. Altogether, on a global account level, or if you have multiple global accounts on the customer level, this gets aggregated. So this is actually the line where the cost owners can see the entire cost for them on this day of the 4th of July. If you want to look at it on a monthly basis, you can look at the other report that actually has the monthly view similar as to the view we had earlier in the application as well. Okay, so here we can find the line of business. And for example, the IT line of business and operations line of business, again, we see the different values being propagated for the exact sub-account that we tagged in the tag manager.
Et voila, that's it. Application is deployed and ready for use. I hope everything went as smooth for you as it did for me, but if not, if you're stuck in one of the steps, feel free to open a GitHub issue and we'll sort it out together. If you have other ideas or general feedback, feel free to leave a comment in the blog. You'll find the links in the description. But for now, thank you and goodbye.